You mentioned your reforms in the early 90s, so it's decades since the so-called mother of all budgets. You faced that rude and unenviable fiscal shock. Having been promised a surplus, you were instead delivered a significant deficit. How do you reflect on the decisions you made?
Well, you know, I was the scalp because I was probably the minister that had the responsibility, from which I didn't flinch, to face down what were the true culprits, which were the undisclosed deficit, 5.2 billion, the BNZ shock, and no transparency. And that led to me to be a driving force was to fix it. Fix it for the future, which was my Fiscal Responsibility Act. So when I look back, we took the corrective action. New Zealand was put on a sound footing, inflation was controlled, growth started to resume, and debt and deficits basically went back in their box, as they should be.
What about poverty?
Well, the real poverty was New Zealand's if we had done nothing. If we had done nothing, then New Zealand would have most certainly faced the crisis that the Labour government did in the mid-80s. And in a crisis, the people who are hurt most are the poorest people, people on the bottom of the rung. So the poverty was of politics. The poverty was lack of political courage to deal with these issues.
So unemployment benefits were cut by 24%. I think the cuts to low-income households were greater in dollar terms than the savings from the top 20% of households. And have a look at this. This is a graphic we put together with the after-housing costs measure. That's a poverty measure that measures the number of kids living in low-income households. So this is from Stats New Zealand, and the different lines show the different levels of poverty. The top line is what they used to call inclusive poverty. The pink line down the bottom there, that's the poorest. That's what they called severe poverty. And you can see, though, there's a common trend in all these measures, right? There's a huge spike in 1991 and a spike that never corrects. Why is that?
Look, the spike that New Zealand had to deal with was debt and deficits. And there was no shrinking that responsibility, because if I was part of a government that looked the other way, we would have condemned the country to generalised poverty. If you look at the unemployment benefit, this government has just taken the same step. It is not morally right for young people to be better off sitting on a couch on a benefit than in the workforce, and yet that was the position that we dealt with. So there were moral reasons to do this, not just economic.
So if I take that measure, in 1990 there were about 7% of kids in severe poverty households. Today there are almost twice as many, 13.6. Well, like I say, that trend has never corrected. So
who do we thank? Thank you, Jacinda, because she was the Minister of Poverty Reduction and did the reverse by not taking those decisions.
The trend never corrected after those 1991 cuts. So I'm worrying about the moral considerations you gave to that, to condemning tens or hundreds of thousands more children to live in severe poverty.